Others following on YouTube, we're live on YouTube right now. So if you can think of anyone who would want to follow along on this conversation but didn't get the chance to be here, you can just direct them to our YouTube channel. We're Baraza Media Lab on YouTube, and we're live as we speak. So today we are here for Baraza Sessions. Baraza Sessions is a regular series that we have here at Baraza. We have it once a month, where we get to speak to exemplary professionals speaking about media and society and trends that are shaping up our relationship to media and media's impact on society. Essentially, that's what Baraza Sessions is about. And today we are so honored and privileged to have my friend and colleague, Asha Mwilu, here with us. She's a familiar face, I'm sure, to everyone here. But there's a lot that we have to say today together. We started out in media, I would say, roughly around the same time. So we're going to be speaking to our own experiences in the media during this particular time frame and the kind of stuff that we've seen shaping the space and emerging trends as well. So join me in welcoming Asha Mwilu as our session guest for Baraza Sessions. Karibu.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks for hosting me.
Karibu sana. Before we begin, just some quick housekeeping. We have two phone booths there at the back. If you look at the back, you'll see some booths which have like the red coin box logo on them. If you need to receive a call during this session, you can walk to the back and take your call from in there. They're soundproof, so we won't be able to hear. And that avoids the movement going out of the main door or moving in front here. Yeah? The other thing is the bathrooms are out past the lifts. The gents is on the left and ladies on the right. And the hashtag that we're using today is hashtag Baraza Sessions. So feel free, oh gosh. My tongue. Feel free to live tweet as we speak. If something comes to mind, just go ahead and feel free to, live tweet as we talk. And somewhere in the middle, towards the end of the session, we'll be collecting questions from you, our live audience. So just think and prepare your questions as the session goes along. And when the mic comes to you, we're happy to take questions. This is towards the end of our conversation. Not right at the end, but towards the end. Sawa. I think that's everything. So we begin. Just waiting for the green light from our director. All right, Asha, we are here. Thank you for making the time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
You were right at the beginning when Baraza Media Lab started. Part of the thinking process, part of what we have here today. And so it's such an honor to have like one of our founder members, our OGs, as a guest here. And we start this conversation the way we usually start our Baraza Sessions, talking about the places, people, and events that shape us and make us who we are, and specifically kind of the events in our lives that kind of converge to lead us in the direction that we've gone as journalists, as creatives, as writers, as storytellers. And this is not work that just everyone does, but the many people who have sat here and told us that this is the reason why I do this work. This is what led me in my life to become a journalist, to do this kind of work. What would you say are your influences, and which relationships nurtured and sustained you as you found yourself, whether actively or whether through a combination of various factors, into the work that you do today, and specifically as an investigative journalist, because I think that's where you've distinguished yourself the most.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I think if you'll allow me, I'd like to thank everyone for making the time to be here. Like, I know it's the middle of a crazy pandemic, crazy 2 years that we've been having, and I think it's really good to just be able to step away and, get some fresh air and also find time to sit down and reflect and share my experiences. So thank you to everyone who's here, and I can see some of my family, my Debunk family. Hi, guys. So to your question, Christine, it's crazy that that's the first question, because it's a very heavy one for me. I remember growing up as a young child when we used to be asked by our teachers, like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
And this was like in lower primary. I used to say that I wanted to be a judge. And I think I wanted to get into a noble career. I wanted to do something noble. There was like a nobility I was looking for, because actually the truth is that when I was young, I was a philanthropist. So I used to feed all the stray cats of the neighborhood.
Right.
And my mom was just, she used to find me very cheeky, because our house used to be full of these cats and dogs, because I would be feeding them. So I think I was always looking for some form of nobility.
Right.
And perhaps that's the route I would have taken if it were not for this very dramatic thing that happened to my life when I was 10 years old. I think we all remember the 7th of August, 1998.
Yes.
I just turned 10, and we had just closed schools. We were on holidays.
Yeah.
And we hear this rumble in the city. And
I think everyone in the city heard it. Like,
exactly.
Anyone who was like, I could hear it from my house.
Yeah.
Everyone in Nairobi says that.
Everyone heard it, everyone felt it. And what I didn't know at the time was that there was a huge bomb blast. It was the first time in Kenya we'd suffered a terror attack. In fact, as Kenyans, we did not know the word terrorism until that day. And for me, the US Embassy, of course, was the target of the attack.
Right.
And my dad at the time was working for Cooperative Bank. He was a manager at Ufundi Cooperative, which was the building right next to the US Embassy.
Right.
And so this one incident then completely turned my life around, and that of my family. And for the next 7 days, my mom was going into hospitals and mortuaries and to the bomb blast site looking for my dad. And his body was among those of the last people to be pulled out of the rubble, because they were buried deep in Ufundi Cooperative collapsed. So they were buried deep inside the rubble. I remember I started being very curious about media at that time, because of course I'm following and trying to find out where's my dad. And I remember reading these newspaper spreads about Rose, the candle in the wind.
Yes.
So Rose was the tea girl in my dad's office. Yeah, she was someone that as a child I used to go to the office and see her all the time, right? And almost like an auntie. And so I lost my dad in that event. But it wasn't just that made me very curious about media, about journalism. The years that followed, of course, we would hold these memorials, right? And we would go to the bomb blast park. And out of the 222 families that lost their loved ones, they formed sort of like a group. So
Right.
my mom was a widow. She was part of the August 7th widow group, and there were other widowers. And what that meant, my family expanded. These guys became my family as well, people who had also lost their loved ones. And all of a sudden, I start learning about inequalities, I start learning that even though we'd lost a breadwinner, we were actually in a really good position, because there are people who lost both parents. There are people who losing a breadwinner meant losing their lifeline entirely.
Everything.
Losing everything. And so the people then that I grew up with, and I remember, were people who had lost their parents, who were in the bus. Remember the bus that was passing the roundabout?
Yes.
And it was completely destroyed. And those were people from very low income families. And that became my reality from the time I was 10 years old. I learned about poverty. I learned about injustice. I learned about how unequal society can be, and our society is. And one time, the first anniversary, we had gone for the memorial, and there's some international journalists and local journalists who wanted to interview children who'd lost their parents.
Yes.
And I was interviewed. I'm on a spread, I'm on a newspaper headline somewhere at Standard Group. So the Standard Group guys, they interviewed me. And I remember when the newspaper came out and I saw my face on the splash, they had 3 children. And they had my face on the front page. And I remember feeling very disappointed because the things I had told them were not what they wrote about.
Really?
Yeah, so the portrayal was, of course I knew we were victims of something, but I always felt that when we would link up for the memorials, usually it was jovial. We were thinking about our loved ones, but a lot of times people would go for lunch right after the memorial. And it was this big lunch table. And it would be all your aunties and uncles and, just talking about life, and it was very jovial.
And there was that love and warmth and solidarity.
And what I saw on the newspaper was this
not that.
Sad, poor child. And I just wondered, who are these guys who write these stories? And so that's the time I decided I actually want to be a journalist when I was 11.
Yeah.
And the trajectory of my life after that was exactly that. I was the journalism chair in primary school, in high school. Everything was about journalism to me, and the issue of representation was very, very important to me. And so that's in a nutshell.
So that experience of being misquoted, you would say, or misrepresented stayed with you.
Yeah, and as a child, I could identify and say that I don't think they did this right, or I don't think this is the full story. This is not my full story. There are 2 sides of this. I'm sad, I'm disappointed, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm grieving, but I'm also very hopeful. I really wanted to talk about what I want to be, what I think about the country. I wanted to address the president.
What did you want to tell the president?
President Moi?
Yes.
That this is not just an event that can be sort of it's not a speck that you can just wipe away. That this was a huge thing that had happened to people, and that the government needed to address it better. I knew of that. So I wanted to talk about that, but I didn't have the chance to. I wasn't quoted. Yeah.
And through the years, you've seen the impact and the way August 7th, 1998 kind of repeats itself over and over again over the past maybe 25 years, you would say 20 years.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And if you, it's weird, my mom and I talk about this a lot because I give her a bit of anxiety. I'm always on the front lines of covering terrorist events. I've covered a lot of the major terrorist events in this country. And so there's always this question of what is it that you're chasing with this issue of terrorism? I just became very intrigued by terrorism, and I always wanted to go to the front lines and talk to people who were lured into terrorism. I wanted to know why, there was that question of why. And I think that has really influenced a lot of my journalism.
And the question of why is not just with terrorism. It has, I see that thread coming up over and over again in many of your investigations, where it's not just enough to say what happened, but also trying to understand why did this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And even at Debunk, the startup that I run right now, I just felt that media usually, unfortunately, our mainstream media in Kenya, and I think all over the world, we always chase the question of what has happened and who has done it, but rarely do we answer to audiences the question of why and so what. And so I used to be called the analytical journalist in the newsroom. I don't know whether there's anything like that, but because my quest would always be to answer why. Why should you care? Why does this matter? Who does this matter to?
Right.
Yeah, and so, I think those are the basics, right? Even as an audience, when you sit back and you watch or you read media, those are the questions that pop up. When you see something has happened, you want to know why. Who, so what? What are the implications? Yeah.
So for me, I find when I watch, let's say, news pieces that actually don't tell me why, I'm depressed afterwards. There is no enlightenment, it's just like this bad thing happened, moving on to the next bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's very disempowering to not have the why.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think it's the nature of breaking news, and that's what a lot of our news does, right? We break the news, we tell people this has happened, and there's a place for that. What we need is deeper news. What we need is slower journalism, and it doesn't have to be that slow. I think there are questions that you can answer very simply for an audience if you care or if you take the time. But now I think I'm really happy that I get to do that at Debunk, and I have a team that wants to do that, and they care about those same questions. So it makes me feel like I'm not the weirdo or the nerd in the newsroom that cares about the why and the so what.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about Debunk in a bit, but I want us to wind back the clock a little bit to our early years in the newsroom, which are not, it's not that long ago, but it really feels like a long time. We both joined the newsroom at a time when social media was basically like just starting up, before the impact of this digital disruption was like fully understood. At the time, I remember Facebook, for example, used to be considered a time-wasting distraction in the newsroom. Like there were Facebook blockers and all kinds of sanctions against being on social media at work. And I think few foresaw how thoroughly digital and social media would destabilize business models and newsroom structures. At the time, it was just like if you had more Twitter followers than the organization you were working for, then you had a problem. Like you would need to answer to the editor or to the CEO why. Why do you have more followers than this organization, right? We were actually kind of like socially sanctioned for that, which now seems very bizarre. I just want us to talk a little bit about taking that as the beginning and today, 2021, as like kind of like the end point of roughly a decade. What would you say have been your biggest lessons at that time, during that time, especially processing this kind of upheaval that we have lived through in real time? And a lot of times we don't get time to actually reflect about what that upheaval really has been about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I look back at those early years for us, yeah? And I mean, yeah, I remember being on Twitter, and I used to use my Twitter I would log in the morning and say, good morning, tweets. I think people, you know.
Yeah, people used to do that. It was so sweet back then.
Old school Twitterati can remember that. Like, you know, you say good morning from Standard Group to Rama or to Larry, who is at Nation, and basically you're just using it like a chat app, right?
Yeah.
For me, I didn't think of social media, to be honest, at that time. I knew social media was definitely like a disruptor, but I thought a disruptor of life, right? When they would have the investigative stories, we knew we had no bulletin because, you know, one story is 1.5 hours. Yeah, 1.5 hours for one piece.
Yeah.
But now, audiences have a shorter attention span, and when they want to actually pay attention to content, they want it written beautifully, they want it
presented
and they want deep content, they want value, right? And so I think that's where media is trying to catch up. But I think in reality, you know, mainstream media they're still the leaders. If you look at the digital space, they're still the people with some of the highest numbers of either if it's subscribers or if it's, you know, sometimes views. But I think, of course, it's tilting. You know, it's tilting and not in their favor.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, Nation has their paywall, but I think they did it too late. You know, I think the fact that they were celebrating 100,000 subscribers, paying subscribers, it's a good feat. But had they done it maybe a couple of years prior, they would have reached 1 million much faster. Because you could not live without the Nation. But now you can.
Right. It's so interesting you say that because for me, my background is in print. I was with the East African at Nation for some time. That's my alma mater. I was telling someone last week that I think for me, what I see shaping up in terms of trends, I don't know how you feel about this, is that at least for written content, people want shorter stuff, right? But also people want in-depth, well-researched, long reads. The part that is hollowing out that people don't care about is this middle kind of wasteland of like nothing stories, 500 words of like a press conference. Like that's a nothing story, no one cares about that.
Yeah.
But like this headline stuff, like this is the important stuff you need to know, bulletin kind of stuff. And then 2,000 words, deeply researched thing that enlightens your life. There's still so much demand for either side of this equation. But this middle thing that kept us busy 70% of the time, like, is gone.
I mean, don't you just think people just want good stories, whether they're long or short? For me, that's what I think. I'll read or watch something as long as I care about it.
Right.
Or as long as like it's really intriguing. You know, I'll listen to a podcast. It just has to make sense. So it's not about the length, I feel. It's just good stories.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the way our newsrooms are set up, they're not set up to produce good stories.
Whoa, you need to say that louder for those in the back.
It's true. It's a conveyor belt, you know? You're a conveyor belt. And having been
this middle nothingness is the
that's
conveyor
nothingness
belt.
you're talking about. It's really a conveyor belt because I have lived it, right? And I have seen it where you come in, sit in an editorial meeting, this is happening, Raila is here, Uhuru is there, and then in between some of the soft stories, you know, Ministry of Health will say this and that, and that's what the newsroom will chase the entire day. And then you'll come, and the stuff that you've gathered, you will decide in the 3 p.m. editorial meeting, this will be our top story, this. And then someone somewhere who's probably not in the newsroom will sprinkle some spice. By the way, there's a scoop here, which really is not a scoop. And then now you guys will package it into a news bulletin. A lot of times that's the news cycle. There's nothing you're telling me. And then now with social media, where you saw what Sonko did, for instance, when he was kicked out of Jeff Koinange's show. Basically, he walked out of studio and went and set up his Facebook Live.
Yeah.
So also these so-called newsmakers, the guys that we had positioned them as the important people or important voices in our stories, now have options to tell their own stories. They set up their own live links. You know, they have their pressers, and within no time, it's all over Twitter, it's all over Facebook.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so what are you there for?
Yeah.
It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's a reality.
And the truth is that over the past, you'd say maybe 10 years, or a little bit more, I think that instability and kind of precarious employment and many rounds of layoffs and basically just a lot of uncertainty is what it has meant to be a journalist. You and I have both lived through this extensively. But it's not only a problem in media. In a lot of other sectors of the economy, gig work is becoming the thing, the gig economy, right? Short-term, frequently low-wage, unstable and unpredictable employment. How do you process this instability? I think our best case scenario, if we were to give it our most generous read, is that this instability creates opportunities for new forms of storytelling to emerge. Like you said, Sonko walks out and sets up Facebook Live. But still there's a lot of suffering, a lot of uncertainty and suffering. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't know, I've had flashbacks to some really crazy times. The first time one of my employers was having a layoff and they were calling it VER. That's how they presented it to the workforce.
What does VER stand for?
Voluntary Early Retirement. So basically you had a chance to apply and say that
apply to be fired.
Apply to be, you would get some benefits, so which is a lot better than being fired, rather than stay on and then be declared redundant. Like, we don't need you. And like, people didn't even want to say the word VER along the corridors. So we came up with a term, they came up with a term, but of course I used it as well. So they were calling it like Vera Sidika. So it's VER, so Vera Sidika. So you're walking along the corridor and you hear, someone asking you, like, are you taking Sidika? You know, just so that like management doesn't hear that you are considering this thing, right? It's just very absurd, but it's just the kind of anxiety that this thing would create in the newsroom, and it would happen. The cycle would be on frequently after
yes.
every couple of months. People are being laid off.
Yes.
And you see how the suffering that people are going through, right?
Right.
And then, for me, what is also absurd is the fact that this is, of course, it's public knowledge. The fact that these big media houses, after laying off people, would bring them back on because you still need them, but on contracts, on contractual basis.
This
Why?
is the thing of like, it's unstable, it has less protections,
Right.
it's more precarious, basically.
Yeah, because you don't want to pay their benefits. You don't want to pay their health insurance or their pension, and so it's much cheaper for you to bring the workforce back in on these contracts that, quite honestly, are very abusive. What I think this, and COVID has been the accelerator.
Right.
COVID has been the catalyst.
Right.
What we're now realizing is that work is not everything. I think a lot of times as Kenyans, we treat employment as like baba na mama, like your job is everything. And this is why you find in a lot of situations people stay at work very late, or you're forced to stay at work, or you don't have a good work-life balance, right? If you go to other countries, I think, you know, if people have gone to West Africa, and especially Francophone West Africa, you will see that by evening, 5 p.m., you stroll in the city center and you feel love. You see couples walking together, you see people strolling with baguettes, and it's
I felt
like,
that in Abidjan, incidentally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I experienced that in Abidjan last year during the pandemic, you know. Like that, there's politics, and they had just gone through an election, and a turbulent one. There's politics, there's all these things happening, but people have time to go to the theater. People have time to listen to music, to catch a breath. And I think as Kenyans, that's what we are realizing, right? And I think what that means for employers, and not just in media, is that employers need to realize that you're working with human beings. Your company is not the building. Your company is not the product. Your company is the people, right? And if your people are not okay, then you're not going to be okay. I think that's a big part of also why media in Kenya was greatly affected. Because you have this workforce that is undermotivated, you know, they are underpaid,
and huge inequality between pay.
And also huge inequalities, exactly. And the people that you find are very important are your so-called brands, the people on air, right? And I, of course, went through this privilege because I was a reporter, I anchored as well. I was sort of like the face of the company a lot of times. And I had a privilege wherever I worked. But then you're working with what the company believes is a support crew, your cameramen, your graphics guys, your driver, your photographers, who you go with to the field, and you can't even sleep in the same hotel because you guys are being given different per diems. And I think it's so obscene, right? So I don't even think it's much about the gig economy. It's about people rethinking what employment means and what it should look like. And yes, the gig economy is there. I think employers should take advantage of it. Because if you have people who want to come in a couple of days in a week, don't want to be there on a full-time basis, but on those days that they come in, they are very productive, even more productive than they would be if they were sitting there for 5 days. What makes sense? I mean, I think money-wise, it makes sense to have someone who's productive, someone who loves what they're doing. I think, honestly, we are rethinking work as Kenyans, and people who are not rethinking work should rethink work. And I think it's more now skill-based. You're here because of your skill and talent, right? And then we'll remunerate you because of that. And then we'll treat you like a human being. And in essence, I think that just grows everything. It grows the company, it grows the economy, grows you as an individual. I think it reflects back on the family. Because you've noticed during COVID, now people are talking about, hey, I'm with my family more why should a pandemic do that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I read this article a couple of weeks ago. The Quartz newsroom, you know Quartz,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In New York, they reopened their newsroom after having everyone work from home for some months.
I saw the survey.
Yeah, the survey, and they asked the employees to decide like what kind of work structure they would want. When do you want to come? How many days? What feels comfortable to you?
Yeah.
And none, zero of the workforce said that they're going to return to the office full time. So all of them were basically chose the option of working mostly from home with the option of coming in once or twice a week. And that survey showed that Wednesdays and Thursdays seem to be the most popular for coming in. And so it kind of signals a very fundamental change in the way that we organize work, where before it was you had to fight for your flexi time. Like you were mostly in the office, but maybe you could get every other Friday working from home, kind of.
Yeah.
But now it's like the inverted. People are expecting working from home to kind of like be the norm in some context, and then occasionally coming to the office. From a print perspective, I remember those early years, you would go, let's say, to a press conference or an event or something, and you would be expected to come back to the newsroom to file your story. And so a lot of us were like, why don't I just go home after the event? Then I'll send it from home. And it's like, no, you have to come back and type. And as we want to see you typing. And, you know, just fighting for that kind of flexibility. I mean, right now it seems very absurd to even, you know, that we are now in a world where like, I guess flexi or like working from home is the norm and not the exception, right?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's also a very elitist conversation.
Right.
Because you and I can afford it, right? We can work from home because we have access to internet. There are ways to still conduct our work. We also work in the formal sector, right? This country, the majority of workers work in the informal sector, and it's not an option for them. In fact, people do want to go back to work, right? Because going back to work means you're going to get a wage at the end of the day or at the end of the week. So I agree with you. I think in the formal sector, for sure, we need to like rework a lot of our perspectives, and I think what we imagine work to be, because I experienced the same thing as you, where you've even filed your story and the editor wants to see you sitting there until the bulletin goes on air, because I don't know what is going to happen to your story between the gallery and the edit suite, right? But yeah, so as I said, like we have to think about our realities as well. I always like to balance with what I observe as a journalist, you know, the people that I talk to when I'm on the ground, and you know, like the mama fuas, for example, the ladies who wash clothes in a lot of the suburbs, and they'll tell you, I want work. I want to go to work. I don't want to stay home, because staying home means being more broke. It means, you know, a widening inequality gap. It means being subjected to domestic violence. It means my children not being able to go back to school. I think you've seen the latest survey that when kids went back to school, girls have stayed back home. Like low-income families have had to choose whether they want the boys or the girls to go back home, and a lot of families are choosing boys, and so girls are lagging behind. And I think that is also the reality. So as we talk about like what COVID has done, what, you know, the great things that COVID has done to those of us in the formal sector, I think it's only given us more privilege. Like, oh, look, you not only have a brilliant salary, now you even have the opportunity to earn it in the comfort of your home, right? And just to put it out there that we really need to think about the reality of our country and the fact that, you know, by October of last year, more than 1 million people had lost their jobs. How do we reconcile all of this when this pandemic ends?
Right.
Yeah.
And at least for us, it's nowhere near ending right now.
Doesn't seem so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just exactly what you're saying, what happens in the formal sector kind of impacts the informal sector as well,
Yeah.
right? And making sure that what we create is actually taking people's real lives and lived experiences into context. For example, I don't think Uber was designed to work in the way that it's used in countries like ours, right? When Uber was designed, it was like people who are drivers will be driving on their way to work or over on the weekends during their free time. But Uber was not designed to be like someone is a full-time driver with a car on loan and this is their main source of employment.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
the kind of structures and the policies and the conditions that kind of Uber has put into place are actually not, they're working with a different set of assumptions, basically is what I'm saying.
Or that in Nairobi, people who have money will hire a driver and have a car, then they convert into the Uber.
Right.
And the Uber driver earns like just a meager salary. And you've heard about how a lot of them are now co-sharing accommodation. In a bed sitter, like you find 3, 4, 5 Uber drivers sharing a bed sitter, you know?
Because they're working in different shifts.
Yeah, they're working different shifts. They can't afford it. They can't afford good accommodation. It's a grind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for you as someone who, you know, does a lot of field work reporting, I would say, how do you kind of come to terms or process this kind of inequalities and injustices that you see on a daily basis that actually don't make it to like our public consciousness? I think in a way in Kenya we kind of like mentally and psychologically accommodate with this kind of like situations.
Yeah.
Because maybe we don't have the bandwidth to process it or we don't feel empowered enough to do something about it. But as someone who is at the front lines of gathering these kinds of stories, how do you process that?
Wow, I processed them very differently than I do now, by the way, because when I was an active reporter, right now I go to the field only on special projects with Debunk. But when I was an active reporter, of course, for me, my response was, I would process it that, I mean, I need to tell these stories, I need to show these inequalities, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it was more about, like, this is the story that I'm following. This is what I want to portray. I want to show a gaze that people haven't seen, right? I want to show a perspective that people haven't heard about. Or I want to present data, like, I want to present data in a specific way. When I stepped out of the newsroom and now went to found Debunk Media and now working at Debunk Media, I think I view it now, obviously I have this experience, this lived experience of being in the field, but now I think about it from a more macro perspective of really now the role of media. Because I think in a lot of times, there are brilliant journalists working in mainstream, working in Kenyan media, and there are brilliant stories that get told every single day. But it's about the frequency of these stories. It's about the prominence.
Prominence.
Yeah, the prominence of these stories. It's about how they're packaged, right? And so for me, now I look at it more from a media owner's perspective of what should the ideal media look like? And I think being a journalist really helps. I used to think this way in the newsroom, that I wish the people who own these media houses have seen.
Yeah.
I wish they would have seen the things that I have seen, or spoken to the people that I've spoken to, because it gives you a different perspective as a human being. And so for me now, I look at it from that lens of a media owner, from really like a holistic view of you're shaping society, right? Or you're helping to shape society. And so every single decision that you make on every single story matters, because it's a domino effect, right? Your headline affects the second story, affects the next story. And so you cannot just treat issues in isolation.
Yeah.
We you know, at Debunk we say this thing that everything is connected.
Yeah.
And we want to make it make sense.
Make it make sense.
Yeah. We want to make it make sense. And so for me, it's more about stepping back and looking at our audiences, these Kenyans who honestly we're in a very delicate position, right, as a country and as a people. we're so broken by our politics. You know, we're so broken by our systems. We're almost hopeless. It worried me so much that I did an expose about a huge corruption issue, scandal in Kenya. And basically it was just a joke. Like, yeah, it's sad that they're stealing, but in fact, it's very little money. That was the reaction from the audience. How do you reconcile things for these people? How do you go back to these people and try to explain that you should care about this issue, even though you've cared about it before and you haven't had a solution, or you haven't had a reprieve, or right now you're in a space where you just want to preserve yourself? How do you make now this country, this society make sense to them? And without burdening them, right? You wake up and there's a headline of a woman has been killed. Like, murder in Kenya now is close to, like, we report on murder the way we report on politics. You can actually, I think editors are now juggling what goes on the front page. It's either politics or a murder, right? So how do you talk to people who are seeing these stories, and they're very traumatic stories, and then explain things to them or make things important to them? So for me, that's the lens I look at it from now, of course now as a senior editor. And I can't believe I'm saying this at my age, right? As a senior editor, because I feel there are a lot of editors who've gone through the newsrooms, and I think for many of them, they've turned away from journalism, understandably so. And we've had them talk to us and say that I just had to go and take care of myself. And so now I look at it from that lens of being a senior editor and then being somehow in an influential position as a media owner, where I can actually decide this is how we will tell the stories, and this is the kind of stories we will tell, and this is the importance we will give them. Yeah.
I want us to say a little bit more about Debunk Media, which I love for many reasons.
Thank you.
One of which is how it looks visually. I really love the graphics and the illustrations and the kind of the vibrancy of how the stories are presented. That's not a trivial thing. Like, you come across a news website that attracts you instead of depressing you, like you said. Yeah. I know it's only been a year or so of being in operation, and you've already begun to talk about like some of your lessons so far. But here's my question. If you had unlimited power and resources, if you had a magic wand basically, what would be the first thing that you would set to change? In other words, what would be like the lowest hanging fruit that you think would make a change, a big systemic change for media startups first, and then more generally for this media ecosystem? And also touching on what you talked about on like even the audience's relationship with media.
How much money are we talking about?
Unlimited. It's a magic wand. It's a magic wand.
Right. Well, first, let me say thank you for the compliment, and on behalf of my team. We really, really think about it, by the way. It's so intentional, and it's refreshing to hear that people out there are receiving it well. Some of them are in the room. In fact, you've seen a guy in a hat. That is our star designer, Ernest. And so I think, when you consume content, you look at, especially like in the written form, and video as well, it's everything matters, right? It's the photos they use, it's how the stories have been written. Every little thing matters to you as the audience. Have you noticed that when you look at African media, and I think now it's changing, when you look at websites, there's always like a quality issue where like it's a stereotypical thing, I don't know, that we fall into, where we'll pick pixelated photos, and plaster them on the website. And only the guys who can really truly afford, I know it's also a cost issue, then you would have like better quality with the mainstream bigger media houses, right? Yeah. But I think like our society, someone sent me, actually our editor at Debunk, our editorial lead, he sent me this article, which I completely agreed with, that all communities deserve good storytelling, right? All communities deserve good storytelling. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Whether you're from a low-income area, you deserve good stories, and you deserve your stories told in a good way. That's our philosophy at Debunk. And so, in fact, sometimes it's very cumbersome, but because we are very intentional, it works for us. One story can go through even 6 pairs of hands, because as it comes out of the editorial team, now it goes into the design team, and they have to read it, internalize it, contextualize, and then illustrate, and then design around it. And it's a very long, sometimes expensive process.
Right.
But when you work with people who care, it matters. A big chunk of our stories are not even written in-house, by the way. They're written by contributors, what mainstream media calls correspondents, right? And you know how correspondents are treated. They're poorly paid. Their stories are treated really badly. Their stories, they don't get good direction. But for us, we're very intentional with how we treat contributors. And so we spend a lot of time hearing their pitches, listening to their ideas, guiding them through the editorial process. And when they're done with their work, when they actually give us their work to publish, then we treat that work very delicately. And then, so I think as the audience, and of course because we have the audience in mind, that is the end product that you receive. Now, concerning your question about this magic wand that you've given me, and I hope it releases money in dollars or euros or pounds, so then I can really dream big, right? But I think this is what even media should have done a long time ago. It's so simple. You have to innovate. You just have to innovate, right? If you gave me this magic wand, maybe I will sprinkle a few at Debunk Media, what you know right now, but I would use it on a lot of other things. If people have been following us, they know we made an announcement that we are now working with a new project lead on a new product that we are creating, which is Debunk Women, right? And this is media for women, by women, and of women. And our project lead is here, Julia. Sorry, let me say Julia, but the interwebs knows her as Jules her. And I would sprinkle there, right? And many other things that we think about at Debunk. We think about publishing, we think about films, we think about like many other products. I think audiences think differently, right? You have your people who watch Netflix, the guys who watch Showmax, maybe people who watch both of them.
Yeah.
You have the people who read the New Yorker, the New York Times, or people who are content just getting the continent on WhatsApp, right?
Yes.
And people who will just go and surf the web. You have your people who will go and read books. People just want to watch films. Others only care about podcasts. These are such diverse, unique audiences. And you have to meet them where they are. Meeting them where they are means spending. It means spending right. And so, for me, perhaps, that wand I would even give it back without having spent too much. Yeah, I think I'll give it back with a bit of change. Because I think it's about being intentional. Meet me where I am as the audience. It's that simple. It doesn't matter how many paywalls you put up. But if I pay this subscription for 1 month or a week or a day, and I go and find the same he said, she said stories, please mark you, and I hope anyone with a paywall is listening, I will not pay again, you know?
Right.
But I will never fail to pay my Netflix subscription. Why? Netflix understands me. Their algorithm understands me. Yes, it's a bad thing, and maybe they know too much, they have too much power, they have too much of my data, but I don't want to think too much on a Friday evening after I've had this really long week, and I go to Netflix and I have to now start deciding what I want to watch. It decides for me. That's where we need to go as media, right? And that's where we need to spend. We need to spend on understanding the audience. We need to spend on data. We need to spend on understanding the trends. Please go on TikTok and try and find any media house from Kenya with an account there. then come and report back whether there's anyone with an account there.
Yeah.
What Twitter and Facebook was to the senior editors and management 10 years ago is now what TikTok is. They cannot even begin to understand what is this app where people are dancing, sijui what, ula la 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 la. Like, how do I even...
What is that?
What is this thing,
what
right?
Is it?
And how do I now start talking to these Gen Zs?
Yeah.
And even the younger ones, right?
Yeah.
You know, I teach at USIU as well. I lecture undergrad students. And believe me, there are moments when, at the beginning of the semester, I walk into the class and they don't know who I am.
Yeah.
They just, and I'm like, you know, I used to work at...
my name is Asha
yes,
Mwilu.
I used to work at this station, you know, Citizen TV and KTN. And they're just like, sorry, Prof, we don't watch.
Yeah.
And I think media managers cannot even begin to understand these youngins, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where I would use money. I don't know if I've made sense.
You definitely have. We were on a panel with, or rather, Njoki Chege was on a panel at a Baraza event. She's a columnist with the Saturday Nation, one of our colleagues. Mm-hmm. And now she's at the Innovation Center at Aga Khan University. And she challenged me to do a story on TikTok. Like, I'm the long read 3,000 words person. Can you distill that into 6 seconds? She's like, I bet you can't. And I'm like, I bet I can.
Have you written it?
So that's the next thing I'm going to do.
Oh, good.
Yes, I need a 6-second story on TikTok. But I want to let our audience know that we're going to be taking questions in the next maybe 5 minutes. So as I ask this second to last question, because I still have one more question that I'll ask way at the end, if we could be thinking of our questions or comments, and the mic will come to you after I've asked what I'm asking, which goes back to women. You were talking about debunk women, and you and I were talking earlier and saying that, you know, these social media spaces, this digital kind of virtual worlds and communities have created rooms specifically for women to have voice, platforms, status in ways that was not attainable before kind of digital opened the space up, right?
Yeah.
Some of them disproportionately have kind of like more influential women, if you could even say influencers, which I think the society reacts very badly to. I think part of it has to do with their content, but I think a big chunk of it is kind of like deeper and unconscious and an emotional reaction to seeing women taking up space, which kind of grabs people the wrong way sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would say about that, about this tension between digital opening up spaces, but also, you know, a few weeks ago, there was a survey that came out, actually not weeks, a couple of months ago, that was talking about the way the news media completely ignores women, like just as a category, generally, you know, in terms of like being news sources, for example. You know, 4 out of 5 people who speak on the media are men. We're talking about news sources, people who are quoted, guests on panels, like all this stuff that kind of like just locks out almost half of our population, right? And this article was also talking about like the structural problems, structural issues that are in play that make it difficult for women to even watch the news at 9 o'clock. What's a typical Kenyan woman doing at 9 p.m.? Probably washing dishes, probably tidying up, probably tucking the kids in bed, signing diaries. Me, I'm usually signing a diary at 9 p.m. Like, you know, like, is there even time in your day to watch or to even participate in this whole thing?
Again, I think it's because people do not understand women as audiences, right?
Right.
I remember, you know, when I joined the newsroom, women were always marginalized, right? And it's not by mistake. I think it's by design that you find women who are quoted in news a lot of times is either a victim,
yes,
right, or someone to like tick a statistic.
Yes.
I think it's by design. I have experienced it. And I have also I'm guilty. Yeah? I'm guilty of being a producer. I used to produce Ivonokwa around Checkpoint, for instance. I'm guilty of having more men on the show than women. But it's because of how that whole system is set up. You know, I don't know whether you've been called to appear on shows, right? But a lot of women experts who do will tell you that a producer will call you last minute, hey, Christine, like right now, we need you on the show tomorrow morning. I mean, the way women are wired, you need to give me time. You need to, like,
I need to rearrange
and also
some things.
There's a way my day is set up,
right,
that I don't just get the privilege of cancelling things.
And saying, I'm going on the show. I'm going on a show.
I'm going on a show. You're probably not a boss somewhere or in a senior position. You probably have to think about like how you're going to navigate work or home, right, for you to appear on the show. It's because the newsroom, of course, like burdens the people who work there. So you're a producer producing like 3 shows. You literally are living hand to mouth because you don't have enough resources. And so it's not your mistake that you'll end up trying to sort out things last minute for certain shows. It's because you're working from one show to another to another.
Right.
When KTN News started, for instance, I was producing 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. One person. I speak to my colleagues who are in the newsroom now, and I mean, I hear horror stories that I've experienced myself because of all the layoffs. First, of course, people can't have interns because they sent away all the interns who are a big part of the workforce, by the way, another form of abuse. They sent home interns because of COVID-19 because, you know, there are no ways to protect them. And so that already removes the buffer for people who are working with a lot of interns as producers. And then there's been layoffs, so you're fewer in the newsroom. The few people who are already working have to work on shifts because of COVID. So 5 days on, 5 days off. Wow. What does that mean? Literally, like, you're so fatigued. That's why you're seeing a lot of mistakes also going on air. And so that design then means that trying to look for women will not be a priority. You'll get the next person who will come on the show. And surprise, surprise, a man will come on the show whether or not they have enough knowledge on the topic. A man will never...
will say yes. Yes, yes,
a man will say yes, right? I mean, because they can and because I think of many other reasons. That's maybe another topic or term paper. How I look at it and how my team at Debunk looks at it is that you rightfully said it. Because of the internet, there's democracy. Because of the internet, women no longer have to wait to appear on the newspaper or to talk about their issues on TV, right?
Yes.
The things that people would discuss in their chamas, they can now discuss on YouTube, right? Women can have accounts, Twitter accounts, and be experts and actually get an audience listening to them.
Right.
Whether it's on finance or it's on mental health or it's on health, whatever the topic, you have an audience. Same thing with men, right? It's for all of us. But now you start to realize that there are very many incredible women out there.
Yes.
So there's a difference between looking at women as audiences or as an audience segment and looking at women in, like, how women are portrayed in news. Like, I think let's not confuse, and a lot of them are also interconnected, but you have to look at things in isolation. So at Debunk Women, let me now wear that hat on behalf of Jules and the team. It's funny because Jules herself has come from, you know, content creation on online, right? We successfully started over 25 with her friends, and they created this space where, for the first time in Kenya, you're now talking about sexuality, you know, as women. You're talking about topics that would ordinarily be looked at as taboo subjects by mainstream media, and so they would never get the time of the day. But now,
especially not in broadcast.
No, of course not in broadcast. I mean, there were just places that we would not go, and you know it, right? in fact, even covering a protest by sex workers, you would really have to consider, like, are we really doing this? Like, these are conversations that would happen editorially. Are we really going to feature sex workers? Can we decide as a team whether to even say sex workers on air? But this is a reality of society. They are there and they're protesting in town, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not you cover it. And so going back to like Debunk Women, for us, we see it as an opportunity because women have been left out for so long, and not just as audiences, but women's stories. And they're just, and I also hate to call it women's stories because they're stories that should just be mainstream.
They're just stories.
They're just
like
stories.
women are people.
Exactly.
News bulletin, women are people.
Exactly. Yeah, but we're very intentional even by calling it Debunk Women because I think it's time that women are served.
Right.
Specifically served. And it's not a space where men are isolated or other parts of society, other people are isolated. It's a very inclusive space, but it's very intentionally done and portrayed that this is for women, right? And this is by women. And when you come to this space, you will primarily see women. You will primarily see women's stories. You will primarily hear about women's issues or issues that affect women. Or you will read about or watch stories about society, but perhaps from a female gaze, which is missing in a lot of media, not just journalism, right? It's missing in film. Films have a very male gaze. And then when you come to Africa, there's another complexity added on there, foreign gaze. And so it is a foreign male gaze. And then it's a foreign white male gaze. I think it's high time we just had something for Kenyan women, black women, African women.
I'm going to open up the floor for comments, but let me just respond to what you've just said about little things that tell us what our perspective is. There's a political party in Kenya whose flag, symbol, logo is a handshake that no woman ever makes. Like, there's no woman who shakes hands like that. Have you ever seen it?
Which one?
You know it. There's no woman who has ever shaken anyone's hand like that. You know. None. So it's just one of those things of like, did anyone think about this? Anyway, questions, comments, we're just going to do like maybe 5 at most. I'm really aiming for us to finish at 7 because of curfew and Uber and transport and all that. So literally we have like just over 15 minutes for me to take questions, for us to answer them, and for me to ask the last question.
So I have 15 questions?
No.
Actually, there are 3. My first question is, you've been in the newsroom and now you're out. How are you dealing with the fact that you're this big macro-organism that you're part of, and how are you compressing that to deliver your stories? And secondly, how do you deal with the failure, especially as a small media entity? Considering if you had failure in a newsroom, your editors would back you up, and protect you. But that's fine, but this is your thing. And then thirdly, is it that we have a terrible is a bad word. Are we struggling with the way we are telling stories, or the stories are just the same? And is there room for us to tell stories better and still, try to compete with, the Reuters and the HP and all that, as a small African woman-led media company? And then fourthly, I want to influence.
Thank you. Should we take this?
Maybe 2 more, and then we can respond to them at once if we can remember all of them.
If we can remember, yeah.
So I'm not a journalist, but I do put out content. So I just wanted to know, how can I make my story more interactive? Because I always feel like sometimes I'm just telling people what to do, which is not very interactive. So I just want to know how I can make it more fun, more engaging for people.
last one? There's a hand there, Doris. Okay.
Hi, Asha.
Hey.
I've enjoyed the session, and my question would be a bit more personal. Now, when you were working at the media, and you were now moving to starting your own company, how was that transition, and was it risky? Was it, I'd like to know what the process of rationalizing that from a step of job to now.
Should we take those?
Let's take those, and then once Asha has answered, we'll take two more. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, I hope I'll remember. Let me start with the lady.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question. First, I don't know. I want to change how people say certain things. So first and foremost, I know I left like a job with a salary. I was working for someone else. I am in a stable job right now at Debunk. It's a very stable job for me. But how I made the transition was that I knew, I started recognizing my pain points, right? When I started becoming uncomfortable, and not just with employment. You know, there's a difference. You can become uncomfortable with your job because you're uncomfortable with a specific company that you're working with. And then that's easy because you can now start searching for another job, right? But I was uncomfortable with the entire ecosystem. I tried. I moved from KT and I went to Citizen. I tried to work with some of my other counterparts. I tried even reporting with another person. You know, I tried everything. But for me, every time I tried to run away, I realized I'm running away from an ecosystem. So I'll never, I can't, you know. It doesn't matter where I work, it'll be the same. And so when I realized that, then the decision became very easy. I need to leave. And for me, it's really like a personal philosophy that I want to do this differently and I want to show that it can be done, right? And so please don't leave your job, yeah? And sleep hungry and not have rent, even though you have like, you know, this like really strong motives to do that. I spoke to a lot of people. You know, you need a community when you want, I think like anyone trying to start something, you need a community and you need to speak to people that you can trust. I think, Christine, you remember, you're one of the people I came to and said, look, I want to do this thing, point me towards the right direction. Yeah. There are people now that I'm working with today that I spoke to maybe even 5 years ago. Like, you know, I'm thinking of this, and they would tell me, not right now, like, or I can help you, but you need to be at a certain point. And so it's just about planning, right? And for anyone who plans to leave employment, of course you will be told you need savings. You need to live when you're comfortable enough to live your life comfortably, right? To pay your rent, to eat, to, even though you're gonna scale down if you need to, make sure you're okay. But I was telling Christine backstage, I wish I did it earlier. Yeah, I wish I did it earlier because I think it can be done. And with a lot of things in life, it's all about you, who you are. It's about your personal drive. And I feel like those are really the things that matter. Yeah.
I think your answer touches on one of Paul's questions, which is about competing with the big players, Reuters and all that.
Yes, and actually I wanted to also tell you, because those were really good questions, but I think we need to stop framing enterprises run by women as small women-led, right? Yes, I am the managing partner at Debunk, but I have a very diverse team, right? We're not small. Sorry. And you know, let me tell you why I'm saying that. You know, the way you've asked the question, you've asked me, how do we, like, what do you think, how do you think you'll get to, you know, where Reuters is, for example? I want to challenge you to go to our website and read our stories. and then go to Reuters or whatever else, whatever other reference point you have. And I don't know whether you will see a lot of differences. So going back to what I told you earlier, the intention, right, behind some of the stories that we do, really the quality is at par. But as is the case with a lot of African-led, I think, startups or media houses or companies in general. All initiatives led by Africans. Until someone from the outside comes and puts a tick, this invisible tick, you know, New York Times has written an article about you, or you've now received funding from Silicon Valley. It's only then now you will
that you're a thing.
That you're a thing. But debunk is a thing. Yeah, respectfully, like I ask you to go and check it out, and I think, you know, like you'll enjoy the content, I hope. Yeah, and thanks for being a big fan of mine. There was another question.
Another question on making content interactive and vibrant and
Yeah, I think you need to, you know, the way you consume content, a lot of times the mistake that we make is that we create content for ourselves, right? So you're creating content that you like, that you want to consume. And so a lot of times, maybe you will find a couple of people who think like you or love the things that you do, but who are you creating that content for? So that's the first question that you have to answer. It's usually very good to have, even if it's an informal focus group. I do that a lot because I also do that. Like, I create content that I like, and it's not a bad thing, right? But you will become an echo chamber. You will be talking to yourself and people who think like you. But you need to have a focus group where, ask people, what do you think? Now I get so challenged because, I mean, you know, the guys who are really like social media savvy, Jules, who has more than 75,000 followers on Instagram. I mean, I have more on Twitter, but Twitter is just tweet, and that's it, right? And there's nothing else. And if you have a blue tick, even better. But now you're told you need to do videos, you need to do shorter videos. So listen to people. And then one word, which is very key, is engagement. What you want is you want people to engage with your content. And so what are you doing to make your audience engage with it? Are you asking them questions, right? Are you sending them like short clips and then, you know, what does the caption say? What platform are you using? Do you know who's on that platform? You know, how they think. So I think those are some of the tips that I would give you. So go outside your family and friends and ask other people who are willing to tell you the truth. That, man, this I don't like. Yeah. It only makes you better. Right. There was another question he asked. I don't know if I answered all of his. Did I answer all of yours?
No, the one on, are we making more interactive stories, or are we looking at a new way of storytelling to keep our audiences? And probably there's no answer actually for it, but it's just a thought that, you know, is it the old system way of storytelling and the new system of, you know, short, punchy, straight to the point? Is that new way of storytelling then that we can, you know, send information out? Because I think that's the main thing, that you get this information. I don't know.
We have more than enough stories, by the way, but you have to think like people are on their phones more, right? So now, like, vertical storytelling is a thing that you have to think of. There are new stories that haven't been told, but there are a lot of old stories that have been told badly.
Yeah, haven't been told well
at
all. I guess our last two questions, and then I will close for us with our final question. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for demystifying the idea of starting a media company, because before it was like, it was just the big three and all, but now when people see companies like Bank and African Censored, they're like, oh, it can be done, and you don't have to be limited to just the media that's there. You don't have to be limited. My question would be, what was your journey like into shaping the bank into what it is? Because every other media house has its own style of doing things, and also you as an individual, like back then, let's say when you were in Citizen and all, you had this style of doing things with investigative documentary pieces like the Mara List, but with beauty. How was the journey like changing that style to fit the bag that you were starting for yourself?
Right.
Also, like, you know, I'm a fan of you. You're one of my
Fans! Hey, my fans. Thank you.
in 17, and you were still at KTN at some media mentorship.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Last question.
Okay. I have a question. It's more about starting a company. But when you're starting a company, maybe you're just a businessman, you don't have a background in media, you don't have any experience in media. But because you're a businessman, you just believe that it will work, okay? Because it has worked in business. So you decide to maybe go and buy cameras and say, I will employ people and it will just work. So that is just a book. That is just a book. So my question is, does the book work? Okay? Thank you.
Okay,
Is that? Yeah, go ahead.
we take those?
I think that's it, yeah.
Okay, I'll start with the first gentleman. Wow, thank you for following me. Actually, anyone who knows that story, Burden of Beauty,
Yeah.
is a real fan.
Oh, yes. I heard that and I was just like, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't even know that story.
Which I was on, Asha. You have to tell.
Sorry, and Christine was on that story as an expert.
I was an expert. Come on.
Yeah, how do I make Debunk sound different? So, I have my own personal style as a storyteller, which a lot of people shape, you know. Your writing is your writing, and your voice is your voice. And so even for me, when you watch my stories, there's a voice and there's a tone that I had, or I have. Debunk Media is not me, right? And that is something that I had to learn. Of course, a lot of the initial ideas were mine, like a lot of them were conceptualized in my brain before I brought a team together. But I think, you know, now when you get to that league of you're launching it as a platform, as a business, there's a reason why you have a team. It cannot sound or read or look like Asha Mwilu. I was producing these stories also on a very different platform. It was TV, the stories were more long form, and they were for mass audience, for example. And of course, then there's also like a house style that I had to meet. With Debunk, it was designing from scratch. Who is our audience? Who is this person who's consuming us? What do they want? How do they speak? What do they look like? Those are the things I had to think of. And then plus, of course, with the team. And the one thing that, for me, that I've learned, and I try to practice every day, is to listen to what my people tell me. And really, Debunk is, I said this, it's the people. So it's the team. So a lot of editorial decisions are taken where I'm not even involved. I shouldn't be, right? I have my role that I play on the team, which is to make sure the thing is running. You know, sometimes even my role now is to make sure we have water, you know? Maji mekatwa, ikwapi nini, let's bring a tanki yeke maji. Like sometimes that's the role that I play. So that means you trust the experts that you've hired. This is a thing you're building, it's completely fresh, it's autonomous of you, right? And it has to, the intention has to be there right from the beginning. So it's to say that Debunk does not have my voice or my style. It has some of my influences, and when I tell stories on Debunk, you can tell, oh, this is an Asha Mwilu story. But really, when you watch Steph, who's our sports journalist, she has her own style. When you watch Kiprono, he has his own style. When you watch Maxine, she's here from Ghana on an exchange program, she has her own style. She has her own way of writing that, of course, is also very different from how we write here in East Africa. West Africans write very differently, and you see that. And so what Debunk does is, Debunk provides like a space for all of us storytellers, myself, Jules, Isaac, Maxine, our illustrators, all of us then now have this platform to really express ourselves and tell our stories in the way we can. And then that now becomes the debunk voice, which is what has happened.
Right.
Yeah.
That tone, that voice for which you're known for, basically.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. The final question about business, hey? You know, you don't go and start a grocery in a place where people farm their own food. You have to think like a business person. So essentially, what are you providing? You know, people say that create a good product, the money will follow. It's the truth in everything that we do. Of course, when it comes to media, there are other things that motivate us. It's not money, right? It's public interest. It is, you know, this quest to solve society's problems. I don't know why we think that it's us who will solve them, but it's this quest to at least tell the stories and make an impact, right? Those are the things that motivate us. But now, the reason why we're even discussing business models is because now we also have the reality of money. And so we also have to think like that. Are we serving a need, right? Are you going to start a media house and start another Tuko? We already have Tuko. What's going to be different from yours? Are you going to start another Debunk? We already have Debunk. What's going to be different, right? So what are you solving? Should be your question. And then you work from there. So if you don't even have like an idea that then you know people will receive it and people need this, then you're not going to make any money.
That's a good answer for.
I hope so.
It's a good answer, which I think applies to many more things rather than media.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the last question. This is, we usually end our conversations all in the same way here at Baraza Sessions, because Baraza is a place of hope. As much as we discuss all our issues and problems in this ecosystem and in media, we are strong believers that there's always hope, right? There's always something left to do. There's always something left to look forward to, right? But this work that we do is heavy, and frequently it's very emotionally brutal. It's draining, yeah? But in order for us to like live and have some joy in it, we have to cultivate the hope and cultivate the joy.
Yeah.
Mariam Kaba says that hope is a discipline, that it's something that you discipline yourself into. It's like a daily practice. So I want to ask you, what are your practices for cultivating joy in this work? And how do you respond to this idea of practicing hope?
Wow, good question. I've learned now through my career in mainstream media and transitioning out to work with Debunk and for Debunk, that the work doesn't have to leave you broken as a human being. Oftentimes, yes, we're exposed to things that make us question humanity, make us question our very existence. But I don't think it has to be that way. And so when you come to Debunk, you'll find us laughing a lot over lunch, you know. You'll find that when we do stories, at the end of the day, we leave feeling triumphant. And I think those are the small joys that people perhaps not in journalism, that they have in their work, right? That journalism doesn't have to be this hopeless profession, really. The work we do is so noble, and I take pride, I find joy just in the idea of that. But of course, yes, there are heavy days. There are stories you do that make you feel like you don't want to do it anymore. And for me, hope and joy is in the basics. And so my mom's tradition of lunch, pilau every Sunday, are things that ground me, you know, family, my nieces. Those are things that ground me as a human being. It doesn't matter what stories I tell. It doesn't matter where this career takes me. At the end of it, I usually try to remind myself, and it's my personal philosophy, it's my personal belief system, that who am I as a human being, right? That is what grounds me. That's what gives me hope. That's what gives me joy. To know that my baseline is family. My baseline is a good evening indoors. Mm-hmm. I'm a homebody, watching just something either meaningless or just entertaining. Yeah. Just like everyone else, honestly. And to not try and make life very heavy on myself. Mm. And to leave things. I used to carry a lot of things, like I would cover Westgate, for example, and after the 4 days, I felt that I carried a lot of the stories that I had covered. I remember people running out of the mall and coming out and saying, I have someone stuck in there. And then you don't even know what to do, so you take their number and you're like, okay, I'll keep track, I'll let you know if I see them in the mortuary, because we have to go and count the bodies. I'll tell you if I've seen them. And then you go home and you've carried all these stories. And so for me, it's also knowing, this is my advice now to journalists, especially investigative and those really working in the front lines and seeing a lot of suffering, it's to try and leave that pain where you covered it. Don't carry it with you.
That's not easy.
It's not.
Yeah.
You have to live. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to live, so you have to.
Mm. All right.
I don't know whether that's hopeful. I feel like that's ended on a really dark note. But please find some hope somewhere in that comment.
In entertaining videos.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess everyone has their own little practices of keeping your spirit alive.
Yeah.
Your soul alive. Mm-hmm. And I like how you answered the question by saying this work doesn't have to break you. Mm. And so we have to protect ourselves from being broken.
Yeah.
All right. We have come to the end of our short time together.
Thank you.
I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for making the time to be here, for sharing so much of yourself and of your story. I love how you said debunk is a thing. It's a big thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be saying that about myself. I mean, Christine Mungai is a thing,
yeah.
So really, come on.
Completely.
So, and to our audience, thank you so much for making the time to be here in the middle of a pandemic while we are waiting for vaccines. I mean, there's so much that could have kept you at home or where you were. But thank you for being here. And for everyone who has followed this on YouTube or will watch it later, please comment down below, share, like this. And subscribe. I forgot. That's the most important
bell.
Subscribe and hit the
notification
bell. Yeah. Right. That's what you need to do.
It's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. Like I said, this is a regular series here. We have this every month. So please follow us on our socials. We are on all the socials to find out when our next session is and who our next guest will be. But in the meantime, please do share this conversation with someone you think would like to watch it or it would help them. Having said that, you are now free to mingle and leave. We're going to hang around a bit to give us time to greet each other. But in the next maybe 20 minutes, we'll start closing down so that all of us have a chance to go home in time. Sawa sawa. All right. Asanteni sana.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's give a clap at least.
There's a minute.
To our guest. Thank you very much.